Hi, my name is Jay Robbins. I'm the broker at Robbins Real Estate Group. This is video 6 in our series of the Texas residential 1 to 4 family contract. In other words, the contract. This is the one we always use. All right, so paragraph 7 goes into property condition and the seller's disclosure notice. So what is a seller's disclosure notice? Why is it important? Well, in most cases, the seller is required to disclose known defects of the property. Now, there's some actual conversation I've heard between attorneys on, are they always required to disclose? I'm not going to get into that. I would just tell you that most sellers who are selling a house, that live in a house, or investors, they have to give a seller's disclosure notice, and they are supposed to disclose all known material defects. There are several forms promulgated by different associations and by the Texas Real Estate Commission. At a bare minimum, they have to disclose what is on the form that the Texas Real Estate Commission promulgates. And you can find that on the Texas Real Estate Commission website, or you can send me an email or text message and I can share that with you. There are more extensive forms put out by the local association and the Texas Association of Realtors that we prefer to use because they give more opportunity, more checks on the checklist for a seller to go through and say, is there a problem here? Yes, no, etc. So it's just a much more extensive checklist. There are a few circumstances where a seller's disclosure notice is not required. One of them is bank foreclosures, one of them is an estate property, etc. But for the most part, you will see a seller's disclosure notice that is a part of the contract or required by the contract. Okay, now this paragraph 7 has a big gotcha. If you're not paying attention as a seller, you can kind of get in trouble here. Here's the gotcha. You'll see here there are two options. Either the buyer has received the seller's disclosure notice, or the other option is that the seller will provide a seller's disclosure notice within a certain number of days. And then option number 3 is the seller's not required. That's not optional for most sellers, by the way. If you're a typical seller selling your house, you can't just say you're not required to disclose. Anyway, if a seller does not provide the seller's disclosure, read it right here in the paragraph. It says that the buyer will have 7 days to back out after they get the seller's disclosure notice. I have actually had this happen where a buyer didn't get their seller's disclosure notice. They got it 2 or 3 days before the property was supposed to close. We had a contract, a 30-day contract. The week before closing, the seller finally sent the seller's disclosure notice and the buyer backed out like the day before closing. So as a seller, you want to make sure of 2 things. You want to make sure that you get the seller's disclosure delivered, ideally before the contract is even signed. The second thing as a seller you want to make sure of is that you get a signed seller's disclosure from the buyer. Seller's disclosures actually have a signature block on there where the buyer signs the disclosure and then they can send it back to the seller. That way everybody's clear. This is what was disclosed. This is what I saw. Now, as a buyer, you definitely want to see the seller's disclosure because if it has foundation problems, a really old roof, mold, or those sorts of things, that is what will be in the seller's disclosure. Termite damage. There can be all kinds of problems that you'll want to know about. So make sure as a buyer that you get that seller's disclosure before you get too far down the line spending all this money on inspections and appraisals. Okay, so that's the seller's disclosure. I hope you learned a little something. My name's Jay Robbins. If you have questions about property condition, if you want me to send you a blank seller's disclosure from Texas Real Estate Commission, just give me a call. I'm at 214-444-9014. It goes right to my cell phone, and I hope to hear from you. Okay, next up in our series of videos is property condition. What do we do about repairs? I'll see you in a minute.